Hello, everyone, and welcome, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Anna Pletcher. I'm a partner at O'Melveny & Myers, and I'm also the Deputy Regional Director of Programs for the Hispanic National Bar Association. On behalf of all of our sponsors today, the Hispanic National Bar Association, San Francisco La Raza, the Association of Latino Marin Attorneys, the American Constitution Society, and O'Melveny & Myers, it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this panel discussion. Our topic today is running for judicial office. We're going to learn some lessons from Latinx judges who ran and won. We're so honored today to be joined by 3 judges who did that. And I'm so excited, as I'm sure you are too, to hear them share your experiences. Before I introduce our distinguished panel, I want to take just a minute to set the stage, to explain why today's discussion is so important. Judges bring with them their experiences, their backgrounds, and their unique perspectives. When courts reflect the diversity of the people it serves, it boosts the public's trust and confidence in our judicial system. Of California's 1,732 state court judges, only 32% of them describe themselves as a race or ethnicity other than white. Yet 63% of Californians describe themselves as a race or ethnicity other than white. 11% of California judges describe themselves as of Latino background, compared to 39% of California's population. At the federal level, people of color make up just 27% of all active Article III judges, and only 9% identify as Latinx. So we have a long way to go before we reach a truly representative bench. Fortunately for us here in the Bay Area, we have 3 elected Latinx judges who are going to speak with us about their experiences running for their seat on the bench. And hopefully they will inspire some of our listeners today to follow in their footsteps. Starting with the longest serving of the group, Judge Daniel Flores. Judge Flores was elected to the San Francisco County Superior Court in 2014. He made it through a primary election against 2 other candidates and ultimately won the general election with a commanding 59.7% of the vote. Before running for judge, Judge Flores worked at Ropers, Majeski, John, Cohn, Bentley, and the San Francisco Public Defender's Office before opening his own law firm. He received his undergraduate degree from California State University and his law degree from the University of the Pacific George School of Law. Judge Sheila Lichtcblau. Judge Lichtcblau was elected to the Marin County Superior Court in 2016, making history as the first woman of color ever on the Marin County bench. Judge Lichtcblau won a primary against 8 other candidates and went on to win a tough general election with 51.9% of the vote. Prior to running for judge, Judge Lichtcblau served as a deputy county counsel in Marin and as a partner at Wright Robinson, Ossimer & Tatum, and Rubicon Legal Services. She received her undergraduate degree from the University of California, Berkeley, and her law degree from the University of California, Hastings College of the Law. And finally, Judge-elect Evangelista. Judge-elect Evangelista is the newest elected judge on our panel, winning her seat on the San Francisco Superior Court in January 2020. She will be sworn in January 2021. She first ran for judge in 2018 and came up short, but she didn't give up. The second time around, she crushed her opponent, winning with 64.9% of the vote. Before winning this election, Judge-elect Evangelista served as a deputy public defender in San Francisco and interned in the San Francisco District Attorney's Office. She received her undergraduate degree from San Francisco State University and her law degree from Vanderbilt University. Thank you so much to all of our distinguished guests for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
We are going to dive in now to some questions, and we have a list of exciting questions for all of you, but we're going to start off with an easy one here just to set the stage. Why did you want to be a judge? So let's start with Judge-elect Evangelista, since she is our newest elected judge on the panel.
So first of all, thank you for having me. It's really exciting to be a Latina and to now have the opportunity to be on the bench, especially in San Francisco. For me, it was kind of a gradual process. I've been working in the San Francisco courts since the 90s in one capacity or another. I started off at the DA's office. And eventually, I think after 16, 17 years of being a trial attorney, I mean, I was in court every day. And I just realized that I could do the job of a judge. It was a natural progression and an evolution of my skill set, because being a trial attorney is definitely an acquired, a skill, a craft.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks. Judge Lichtcblau, going in reverse order of seniority.
So for me, it was as well a process. I didn't go to law school thinking I wanted to be a judge. I knew that I wanted to serve the public at some point in some capacity, and had done that. And when I was a deputy county counsel, I was serving the county of Marin through the various departments by giving the various departments advice. And at some point, it occurred to me that I really would enjoy serving the public and the constituents of Marin in a more direct capacity. And so that's what really inspired me to think about becoming a judge. And in that process, I did take some steps to make sure that this is what I wanted to do. I started pro temping, so serving as a judge for the small claims department, and I also began serving as a mediator, volunteering as a mediator for the Northern District of Federal Court. And so through that process, I really decided, yes, this was something that I wanted to do, but I did take a little bit of time in making sure that this was the right path for me.
Good. And Judge
Thank
Flores.
you for. I'm left. Thank you for having me. I must say I kind of like the seniority business. It's a little. That's a little new to me. Nonetheless, thank you for having me. And all jokes aside, I was a litigator for about 14 years, and spent the last 8 years as a criminal defense attorney. Was in court pretty much every day throughout the Bay Area in private practice, and it really became apparent that who the audience was, that being the judge most of the time, was really important and critical to what the outcome of justice would be. I was very inspired by judges who were hardworking, who really showed empathy and cared for people who appeared before them. I was also inspired in a different way by judges who showed a little less of that. And the combination of that really brought home the idea that if I really wanted to serve, especially in my hometown of San Francisco, that this would be a great way to do it. A law geek, so this would be, the way to do it for me.
Wonderful. Well, we're all very fortunate that you chose the path that you did. Now, judges in California can either be appointed or elected. Now, all of you ended up running for office, so let's get into that a little bit more. Starting with Judge Lichtcblau, why is it that you ran for office as opposed to going through the appointments process?
Well, I actually did have my application pending in the application process. But Marin County is a small county. There are only 12 judges. Appointment slots don't come up that often. So while my application was pending, this seat opened up. And so I decided that I would explore this alternative route. Of course, when I decided to do this, I didn't realize that 8 other candidates were going to join the race. So that made it a little challenging. But I took advantage of that opening because the process for applications can take a very long time. And it can be a little bit political. I think that the judge who ended up vacating her seat did so at a time where to create actually an opening. I believe that Judge Diopel, the retiring judge, stated that she wanted the people of Marin County to decide. And so I jumped on that opportunity while my application was pending.
Mm-hmm. Judge Flores, how did you end up running as opposed to being appointed?
So I had not begun an application process, and that probably would have happened sometime later. I was quite frankly caught by surprise by the opportunity to become a candidate for judicial office. It was something I was aware of. I watched Judge Gerardo Sandoval run for election. And so I knew the concept of it, but I wasn't anticipating doing that. I had just settled a case that I had cleared 2 weeks out for trial. And I was in my office when I found out about the idea. But I'm very grateful that I did. It was actually Judge Sandoval that reached out and made sure that I was aware that such a thing was available now in a very immediate fashion. And I'm glad I didn't know everything I know now. I might have been scared off. No need to scare you off, because
we're going to get there. Don't worry. We're going to talk about that.
But that's where I was in the process.
Judge Evangelista. Judge Eli.
I was also caught by surprise that there was an opening, an opportunity that I couldn't pass by. I actually had I had printed and filled out my judicial application form, and I'm glad that I did, because when running, you also have to go before the San Francisco Bar Association, and they grade you just the same as if you were putting in your application, whether you submit an application or not. And so I think it was good. I'd recommend that to anybody, whether they're thinking about exploring the idea, not even married to it, printing out the application, or if they're thinking about that maybe running might be the way for them to go if they don't feel that they have a certain type of political ties, but that they might be more grassroots. Printing out that application, I think, is key, is just looking at all the areas in which judges have valuable ties, things to offer to the community, and what is valued by the community in a judge. And so that's what I did, and I jumped in.
Interesting. So filling out the application helped you kind of understand, or maybe articulate better, your reasons for running, your values, and thinking through some of the things that later helped you on the campaign trail?
Right, absolutely. And not necessarily in a political sense, right? Left versus right, but just more in a sense of, what things are important to you, what things you've done for the community, what characteristics and qualities that you have that you think good judges have. Those are all questions that they're going to ask you on the application process, and there are issues that come up while you're running. So I think it's important to go ahead and start filling that out. There might be an area where you might be a little weak or deficient. You might say, oh, I did that, but I never kept track of it. And it's also a good way to keep track of all the participation that you have on the boards you've been sitting on, all those volunteer hours, what you're doing in the community. For example, I belong to my church's hospitality committee, but I never thought of that as something that that would be important for somebody thinking about, a judge is well-rounded in that way. But it's something that comes up quite a bit, actually, and it's important to make sure that the person is well-rounded on top of being qualified.
If I could just add to that,
Judge Lichtcblau, yes.
I really would echo the comments here being made about filling out an application. I certainly think that I don't think I would have been in the position of, I'm not even sure I would have run, frankly, if a position had just opened up. But I had spent a lot of time thinking about the application. I had filled it out. I had gone through our judicial nomination process and passed that process and gone through the vetting. And so I had already started to cultivate, to not only think about what it is and why I wanted to be a judge, but to be able to articulate it by filling out that application, preparing for my Jenny interview, speaking to several people, because as part of the process, you do want to get in touch with as many people as possible. You want to get potentially letters of recommendation. And all of that really did lay the groundwork for me in terms of the election, such that when it came time to jump into the election, I had established some connections and felt pretty confident in my ability to be able to articulate why I wanted to be a judge and to talk about my qualifications for being a judge.
Just for the benefit of our listeners who are not necessarily familiar, the Jenny Commission in California is a group of attorneys who vet judicial applications that go on to the governor's office. So thank you.
If I could jump in here
Yes.
briefly, I have the honor of serving on the Governor's Judicial Selection Advisory Committee for the Bay Area. And we are a committee of judges and lawyers that do somewhat of a pre-vet process before a candidate is sent to Jenny. And the application is something that is mandatory and for the process to start. And it's something that speaks volumes about the applicant, what they find important. You're asked to list most significant cases and the reasons behind those cases being significant to the applicant is significant to us. We talk about it. It's not a purpose. The purpose isn't to scrutinize, but we talk about the words people use, for example, and how they articulate, what emotions come up when you talk about that. One could tell the same story. For example, I'm saying this for the benefit of those who will be applying. Hopefully many of you watching will apply. There's a difference describing a win where your focus is on the justice that you were able to achieve for your client versus something that sounds like you're self-congratulating. And I've seen both in a very short period of time. I've also seen typos and things that should never happen on something so serious like that. But it's definitely a great tool to keep in mind. And I filled it out and passed it around to many different organizations as a judicial candidate running for election because people expect that you will have put that much thought into your race.
That's a great point. Thank you all. Let's pick up on Judge Flores, what you mentioned somewhat jokingly, but I think also not really. The fact that if you had known certain things about running for office, maybe you would have given you cause. Hopefully you would have continued to pursue your dream. But let's get into some of that so we can just have an honest conversation about the real challenges of running for office. They are real and they can be very intense. So I'll ask whoever wants to start with this one to give us some of the biggest challenges that you faced during the campaign and how you were able to overcome them.
Fundraising.
Yes.
Yes.
Fundraising is so hard. All right, Judge Lichtcblau, tell us about that. Tell us why is it so hard? What are the
Well, asking people for money is really hard, especially when you are running for a position where you are committed to being neutral. If you are running for a political position, senator, representative, district attorney, anything like that, you usually have a platform. And for judges, it's harder to articulate a platform because you are committed to being neutral and following the rule of law. And that just doesn't sound as sexy to people as, I'm going to come in and I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. So that is one of the hurdles with fundraising is people will ask, well, why should I contribute to you? And you don't have that platform that you might otherwise have if you were in a political position. It's also a little bit dicey because you cannot, as a judge there or even a judicial candidate, you cannot comment on certain matters that you may have to rule on. And so people will want you to commit to certain positions and you can't do that. So it becomes very difficult to ask people for money. And that is, from my perspective, one of the biggest challenges. I think it's challenging for any candidate elected or a candidate for office, judicial or not, to ask for money. But I think there's an extra layer of difficulty that comes with fundraising for a judicial campaign.
For me, I would say I work for the city. I worked for the city for almost 17 years, and we can't solicit funds from other city employees. So having worked for the city for that long and, making a lot of my friends and my coworkers not being able to ask them is a big pool. So going into it, you have to think of, well, who would be the people that would be able to contribute to your campaign. I mean, obviously you have to start with your phone number, with your phone list, everybody in your phone, your family, your friends, and then there's more of an extended web but it is difficult. For some people, it can be embarrassing to ask for money. And, you know, we do our own fundraising. It's not like we hire somebody to do it. You got to call them and ask. And it, you know, I would say the positive side is that there's no limit. So if somebody's able to give a little more than what the $500 did, it might offset, you know, somebody that isn't able to give as much. So you have a little flexibility and wiggle room there. But that was one of the impediments that I had in my campaign.
I had a lot of the same obstacles and difficulties. It was somewhat difficult, a little embarrassing to ask people for money in a way that, you know, trying to balance asking for an amount of money that was, you know, asking for more money than maybe someone has ever given, right? I'll never forget talking to one of my friends from college, and I asked him, said, yeah, so, you know, $500 would go a long way. And he said, $500? Like, you know, I was hoping you might, you know, give me 1,000, but, you know, he said, well, you know, that's a lot of money. And he started telling me a little bit more about his family circumstance. And I was like, wow, you know, that's not what, I didn't expect to go down that path, but maybe I should have. You know, ultimately he gave me $250, which I much appreciated. But that's a small example of how asking for money can be awkward. It could also be very time consuming. So as a separate issue with that, I personally felt rude just calling in for money without doing a long explanation about what I hope to accomplish with people that I haven't talked to for a while, doing a little catch up and, you know, why this is significant. Are there other areas you want to talk about with respect to?
Well, let's get into fundraising a little bit more, since you brought it up as being possibly the biggest challenge of running a campaign. Let's put some numbers on this. So how much did you have to raise?
So first, let me segue here. I will answer the question, but I think it's important to talk about every county is different. Yes. Your jurisdiction is going to be very different, or it's going to have a big impact on how you fundraise, what you're expected to fundraise, what is a lot. So in my race, I put in a total of $250,000. I raised $100,000 and put in about $150,000 of my own money, including family donations. And that's a lot. And you know, there was even something in the recorder, and you know, they like ranked that year in 2015 how much people spent on races. It was far from being the highest. There was one number, I think it was 600,000 in Los Angeles. But it definitely varies. In San Francisco, this is a county where there are a lot of people and a lot of groundwork campaign goes into it. In fact, I think that San Franciscans expect to see their candidates out in the street. They expect to meet you and to have some type of personal contact with you or with groups that they find that they gravitate towards or they may be members of. And I know that in some other counties, that's not the case. Either they're rural, they're too big, or like Los Angeles, for example, a lot goes into the mailers.
Right. And Danny, isn't what your campaign was, there was a runoff, right? So yours was a little more. You had to go longer. You kind of had two campaigns.
Right. No, that's a great point. The amount that I've quoted is for February through November. So that includes the primary, which was then in June, and the general in November.
Right.
I missed it by a little bit.
A little bit.
You know, that's a significant amount of money. Judge-elect Evangelista.
So my election that was in November, my budget was $150,000. Came pretty close to raising that. We're not done with, you know, closing out some of the debt, but we came pretty close. I could have spent more and you could have spent less. It's kind of like a wedding in some ways, right? You can go way over the top, and then there's just some things that you absolutely need. You know, you need a consultant, you need somebody to put together your thoughts and who you are, and be able to transmit that so that people know you're running and what you're about. I think that people wonder, well, what's the money going to? It's just so that people know you're running. I mean, that's when it comes down to it, that's what it is. It's If you have so much money that you can, get into persuasion, right? To persuade people, I think in San Francisco, like I said, I spent $150,000 and that to me seemed like a lot of money. I try to spend it really wisely and just getting out to the key voters. And like Judge Flores said, I think that what's really important is just getting out there yourself. Your time is money too. I mean, time is valuable, and you're out there every day in the morning at, the bus stops, meeting people, which is part of what I enjoyed the most about the campaign. But also you have to hand them, a little card or a little something to remember you by when they go to the polls, and that, printing costs, design costs, that's where the money goes to. It's nothing over the top and fancy, at least in my experience for my campaign. It was just putting my name and my face on a card that people can remember and say, oh yeah, I actually met her. Yeah.
Yeah, Judge Lichtcblau.
So I am blanking. I must have intentionally erased it from my memory because it was such a traumatic experience. But I think my numbers were somewhat close to Judge Flores. I think the total was somewhere around 240, 230, something like that. That was, of course, to get through the primary and the general election. So that was approximately 9 months of campaigning, kind of like having a baby. And in Marin County, what I was told by my consultants was that it was a mail county, meaning people read their mail, which I always thought was sort of interesting because you get these flyers and who's looking at them. But the consultants that I had hired said, look, this is an older demographic, and a lot of the voters like to take their mail and stack up all the kind of the different flyers and then go through it when they are trying to figure out who to vote for. And so you need to do a lot of mail. Well, if you think about postage for mail, it's incredibly expensive. When you start thinking of how much it costs to send to each household. So each mailer could be, depending on how you could figure out the numbers, can be $30,000 easily. If you're going to do a couple mailers in the primary, which you need to, because then your opponents are putting out mail, you have to do at least a couple. That adds up really quickly. And so that's where, at least for me, the bulk of the money went, which meant that I had to raise or contribute out of my own income, which I did, a certain amount of money.
So Judge Lichtcblau and Judge Evangelista, you both hired consultants. Did you also hire one, Judge Flores?
Yes, I did. I had a consultant, professional consultant. I also, my legal assistant, who I'll forever be grateful for, became my campaign manager. And after signing a check over to campaign consultant, I realized that those are two separate people. So your campaign manager.
Could you explain that? Explain the different roles.
Sure, absolutely. I hired a consultant who had a consulting firm, and there were other people that worked there. And he told me very early on, I'm not going to be your day-to-day person. I'm going to be maybe higher level messaging and putting you in contact with different people. I'll always be there for you, but day-to-day, my staff person will answer questions and that kind of thing. So I quickly, learned that staff person who's great and is a professional in her own right, just simply did not have the bandwidth to deal with the type of workload that I wanted to bring to the campaign. And it was going to be someone else that I needed to bring from the outside. And I was lucky to have my legal assistant willing to take on that job as my law firm was essentially winding down. But that was a separate paycheck, well worth it. But it was definitely an additional cost that went into the campaign. Someone that would coordinate volunteers, someone that would follow up with people as to where events were going to be, as to what time I was scheduled to speak at an event, as to whether there's something was relocated, all the day-to-day, which brings up another thing that we could talk about later on. I just want to mention it once, just health. Your health is its own obstacle in a campaign. You're meeting a lot of people. Things may be different now after COVID-19, but at the time you're shaking a lot of hands, you're meeting a lot of people, and you're not getting a lot of sleep. It wears on you. I got physically exhausted twice during the 9 months of campaign, where one day I said, I'm just not getting out of bed. Like, I feel like I can't. And that's a lot. For me, that's a lot. But it happened once every, about 90 days. And then the campaign was over. But it did take a toll in that aspect as well.
Well, let's talk more about that. So the first challenge we talked about was fundraising. And here's another really big challenge, is maintaining your own health and your own focus and your own balance. Maybe you have a family that you're concerned about. Maybe you have a job and an income that you need. So how do you deal with those stresses? How do you overcome them? Who wants to start with that one? Well, Judge Flores already got us kicked off. Judge Lichtcblau, Judge Evangelista?
Sure. So I think all of us had kids while we were campaigning. We had, I don't know, I think my boys were probably something like 12 and 9 or something during that time period. And I think it was probably similar, I think, for you, Judge Flores. I'm not sure if you similar kids that age, but anyway, so you have your family, and it can be extremely trying. It really can. And of course, I would try and drag them everywhere with me, and they would, not as enthusiastic as I had otherwise hoped. But you can also use the connections that you have through your children and their friends parents to help you out. And so that was something that I was. You find these volunteers in just the most wonderful and unexpected places, and you realize that there are people who are so willing to go to great lengths to help you. And I don't know where that love and that sense of just sure, I'll pitch in comes from, but for me personally, I drew a lot of strength from that. It was really exhausting. I remember losing weight when I was campaigning, just because you're going, and you're constantly thinking about it. It's like you go to sleep, you're thinking about it. You wake up in the middle of the night, you're thinking about it. You get up in the morning, you're thinking about it. If you're still working, as I was, and certainly I was a government employee, you can't be campaigning during your work time, and you can't use anything, any computer or anything, even to check email if it's campaign related. So every break you have at lunch or whatever, you're running out into the parking lot with your cell phone calling people. It's exhausting nonstop. And you do need to watch yourself to make sure that you're okay. I was fortunate enough to have my husband, who was serving as the treasurer and kind of CEO. He wouldn't describe himself as a campaign manager because he was off doing a bunch of other stuff, but he was really there helping me, frankly, manage the household, and also just providing me with a lot of support. I could not have done this without him. I mean, you really benefit from having family and friends who can assist you, because it is exhausting. It really is.
I would say, I would analogize it to being in a really serious trial, like being in a life case kind of a trial, maybe one that lasts 3 months, 4 months. It felt a lot like that. It felt similar. I actually enjoyed campaigning. I know Judge Flores, everywhere I went and introduced myself, people were like, oh, do you know Judge Flores? He had been there, and he was such a role model, and he had built that community, that sense of community, coalition building that he did that was so great. And for me, that was really energizing. And so I didn't see the campaign as work. I kind of saw it as a privilege for me. Given my background, given how my dad had come here as a farm worker, and, so I found a lot of joy, even in the hardest of works and the hardest of days and the most exhausted. I found a lot of joy in that. And, I'm proud of the way that I ran the campaign, because I let myself enjoy it. Just like even in doing a trial, like you can enjoy the trial or you can fight it and say, man, this is hard. you know, and I just let myself enjoy the process. And I think people felt that, you know, but again, for me, it goes back to the fundraising. That was the painful part for me. You know, not the physical, is the financial. Is where is this going to come from? But again, you know, we're resourceful people. We went to law school, we passed the bar. Like, you know, when we got to come up with something, we do it. And I think that's a good thing to think of going into it is am I that type of person? You know, am I resourceful? Are my friends going to pitch in? Is my husband going to be great with that? I mean, the first thing I did was talk to my husband. Obviously, it wasn't an individual decision to run. It was a family decision to run. And my husband's also an attorney. I said, do you want to run? Do you want to put your name in? And he was like, no, this is all you. And, you know, he was super supportive at home. And it was a little melancholic. I wanted him to be out on the trail with me. And then, but I also needed him at home. So it was, thankfully for me, it was just a quick, you know, almost 90, 120 day run. I think I filed on Halloween, and then it was over by March. So it was quick. I know that for some of y'all, 9-month campaign is really long. So that was maybe a little less joy towards the end. I don't know.
I have to echo what Maria's saying about having fun.
Yeah.
My comments it's a true story in terms of feeling so exhausted at certain points, but I had a ton of fun during the campaign. That's naturally, I like going to events. As a lawyer, I went to events. You know, I'm kind of, you know, the person that'll go to meetings and go to events and have a good time. So that aspect of it came very naturally. Since the campaign, I've read the book Quiet, and I think it's a book about, you know, different personalities, introvert, extrovert. It taught me a lot of things that I had never focused on before, but there is a high that you get in that campaigning aspect, and I think it's important to point out too. Maria alluded to it, but even while I was campaigning, without knowing, of course, if I would win. There was something I think that I should mention in this webinar, which is that I felt so proud to be uplifting Latinos in the community. Okay? Yeah. Just to have that privilege to be someone that people were rallying behind because they got to know me a little bit, but most importantly, in some settings, because they saw me as a Latino role model, someone who was doing something that was beyond something for me. It was something that would help the Latino community. That's a huge obligation, but it's a huge privilege that for me, it really made me happy. It brought me joy, and it gave me motivation to keep fighting.
Yep.
So I have so many things I want to ask you here, so many directions we could go. Let's talk for a minute about mentors, about the people who supported you along the way and the people you consider mentors. Judge Lichtcblau mentioned her husband as a big support, but are there people who encouraged you, who held their hand out to you, who you knew you could rely on for that support, the emotional support, whatever support you needed to get you through this campaign, and who maybe were role models for you?
So I don't know if you're asking me, you know, when I was going through the appointment process, Jose Varela in the public defender's office, he was somebody from the get-go when I was in the county counsel's office who basically came to me and said, you know what, we want to see you in a position of leadership. And I had, you know, it was really amazing to have somebody come and tell you that. And so, you know, during the appointment process, he was very supportive, and along the way, there were a lot of people who were very supportive of me, who I had worked with, and I do think that you draw strength from that, and you draw strength from people who are, like I said, willing to go the extra mile, who are willing to go out and endorse, who are willing to give you that advice that you need, so all of them, in a sense, were mentors to me, because they were just, I was able to just, as we talk about, draw on so much of that strength.
Yeah, I'm grateful for my wife, who was my rock, always is. And in terms of being supportive 100%. I will say that about 2 weeks into the campaign, she said, you didn't really explain this quite clearly in terms of what we're getting ourselves into. But, she had my back when I opened up my own practice. She had my back when I ran for judge, and I'm definitely grateful for her. In the legal community, a lot of mentors. I mentioned Judge Sandoval took a lot of time talking to me about what campaigning was like, was always available for me. Judge Loretta Georgie, another Latina who's on the San Francisco bench, was one of the first persons. She was the first judge I went to see in person. And she, literally held her hands out and said, "Are you here to tell me what I think you're here to tell me?" And that set the whole campaign from that point forward, to say it's not only like a yes, it's you're hoping that I do this. And I always knew I could count on her as well, and I still do. So I'm blessed with a lot of support, and also people that you meet. So I met politicians that happened to be campaigning at the time that I was campaigning, who at first may not know you because I wasn't a political person that way, but who see hard work, and who see that you're doing something genuine, and then draw attention to you maybe at events. Here's candidate Flores, he's running for judge, you should listen to him, or I'm endorsing him, or something of that nature. So these opportunities just come up organically. Very grateful for all of those as well.
I just want to say that I, and Judge Flores knows this, I met him through an introduction of someone from ALMA, the Association of Latino Marin Attorneys, and he does not know the inspiration that he was to me in that meeting that we had, that lunch that we had. I walked away blown away. So he doesn't know how much of an inspiration he was, but he truly was. And I met him at the very beginning of the campaign. Just listening to him talk about it, listening to that energy that he brought just really inspired me. And so it's funny because, we may not know that we are providing sort of these opportunities for others, but it's great when you have other people willing to share their experiences and to give you that strength and that hope to go on, because it's such an unknown when you're running. It really is. It's the scariest thing in the world. And so to hear from other people from your community, it's just fantastic.
Thank you.
So I want to echo that sentiment because, everywhere I went, everybody said, "Oh, do you know Danny?" Because, Danny had, been there walking the steps before me. And here I was trying to walk in those really big footprints that he left behind. And, made me really proud. I didn't have a mentor per se in this area because, again, there's so few Latinos, and again, my own discomfort in reaching out. I always would reach out kind of hoping, oh, let's have lunch maybe. And then if they brought it up or suggested it, then that would affirm me. But in terms of being on the campaign trail mentorship, I had people come out of the woodworks in every community, not just the Latino community. For whatever reason, I had people come out and reach out to me, email me and say, "Hey, I heard you're running." And they would offer advice and help, political and otherwise, from organizations. And they were excited that I was running. And some people were excited because I was a Latina and I would be the first Latina elected in San Francisco. But some people were just excited about my story, where I came from, where my parents came from, and what that meant in these times, and what my own personal story, aside from my father's story, which is really important. Sometimes I think it's even more important than my struggle that I had is his story. But then I tell them about my story and how I grew up. And then they embraced that and said, let's do it, and I wouldn't be here without all those people having reached out, those texts, those calls. You know, and I guess maybe that's how grassroots catches fire. But you know, definitely Judge Flores set pretty high bar to reach before me, and I'm glad he did, because he broke the ice, right? Then when they saw me coming, they said, "Oh, let's see if she's got what Judge Flores had." So it gave me an opportunity. So thank you.
And it's so wonderful to see that this group here is really reaching out to others, to especially other Latinos, to encourage them to follow in your footsteps, and you know, you pull people along, and that's how we create that diversity. So it's very exciting. I'm gonna shift.
Anna, can I
Yeah.
jump in and say one thing? So first of all, Maria's being very humble because she had her own fire going on. And I can attest to the number of people who ask me, well, you know, do you know Maria? And, you know, you should, and what's, you know, Maria this, Maria that. So that was nice to see. But, you know, we mentioned, it was brought up earlier that, you know, one of the challenges of campaigning for judge is the fact that you're not political. You can't make any promises. You can't suggest, you know, what you would do in a particular case. There's the flip side of that, however, and I think this is what underlies some of the comments that are being made here. The flip side of that is that what you have to offer is yourself, and in a very important role. And campaigning for judge is hard because it doesn't happen that often. But if you take the time to educate people about how significant it is to have the opportunity to elect a Superior Court judge that has an opportunity to touch more families' lives than most politicians will ever directly do, then what is left is something very organic, very, very natural, and very real. It is an investment into that person. Will that person, is that someone that you could trust to do their job, to make tough calls, to have courage to make tough calls, even things that may not be politically popular. So giving people the opportunity to do something like that is also something very valuable, because most people don't ever feel like they have that opportunity to do something of that significance. And it's mutual. I think people feel good about running for someone who's not trying to promise them something.
Yep.
So that, I think that hopefully will encourage people watching.
Well, that goes exactly to the question that I was going to ask next, was because a judicial race has certain restrictions on it, and you can't make promises, and you can't talk about pending cases or what you would do in a certain case, how do you communicate those underlying values? And what I'm hearing you saying is that the voters want to know who you are and what you stand for. And how are you able to communicate that without referring to particular issues that the public might want to know what your positions are on?
So, you know, what I did often was I would talk about my background. I would talk about my parents' background as immigrants to this country. I would talk about how, based on my background, I was committed to ensuring that every single person have an equal voice in the courtroom. And I was able to draw upon my background, which was somewhat varied in the people and entities that I had represented. And that's how I was able to explain what I would be like as a judge, because you're absolutely correct. We cannot talk about certain positions that we would take. But, you know, for example, if people would say, well, you know, how do I know that, you know, you're currently working for the county, the big government, how do I know that you're going to look out for the little person? I would explain the years that I spent working for a nonprofit organization representing the poor. Or I would, you know, I would just draw upon my background to try and explain or show that I'm somebody who really would give everyone an equal voice in the courtroom. And that's how I did it. It is a little tricky, and it can require. But the other thing I wanted to say is that a lot of people do want to hear your story, and they don't just want to hear your story, but they want to hear the story of your family, because that really does bring a commonality. It brings a feeling of what you would be like And so for me to be able to talk about my parents and my parents coming to this country and what it was like, and the sacrifices they made, I think really part of that was informing the voter as to the type of person that I was. And it also, frankly, it's inspiring to me to talk about my family. It's inspiring for me to, and it's such a joy for me. I'm so proud of that. So I enjoyed it, and I feel like it gave the voters somebody to think about. It worked for me. I would encourage any of you out there who are thinking about running to draw upon your parents' stories, to draw upon the immigrant experience, because it brings something that is just so rich to this life that we live in. It's a huge benefit.
It's interesting that you say that, Judge Sheila, because I, on the campaign trail, I didn't have that many people asking me what my position was on different issues. I felt like they, somewhere along the lines, they had probably heard that judges can't get political, right? So they just wouldn't ask me that. So then I tell them, you know what? If I were in your position, I wouldn't know if I could trust me either. So all you have to go on is where I've been to know where I'm going to go. And my qualities come from this background, and my commitment to wanting to be on the bench comes from this struggle. And then you tie in the story, and most of them would just be, wow, you open up your soul to them in, 2 minutes, 1 minute, 30 seconds, whatever you've got. And I found it to be really effective. I also, this campaign found that the voters in San Francisco were super receptive to talking about the judicial campaign. They were excited about it. They were polite. And I think, hey, I don't know why, but I had a feeling that it was because of other political things going on in the country, that they were excited. They kept saying, thank you. It's like, I haven't told you what I'm running for yet. They kept saying, thank you for running. Thank you for being a woman and running. So sometimes it became the issue, not about being Latina, but just about being a woman or being a mom or being a San Franciscan, for standing up for that. And so, yeah, I didn't find, it difficult to not talk about politics, because they're like, well, you have to apply the law neutrally, but I want to know if I can trust you, because some things can go either way, or some things are difficult. Can I trust you with family issues? Can I trust you with these things, because you have to follow the law. I think it comes down to trust, and then testing if what you're saying today was fabricated today, or do you have something to back that up that comes from your personal history, so.
Judge Flores, did you want to add on to that?
I really have nothing to add. Everything's been said already. I agree with everything that's been said. People do want to know what you've done in the past. That speaks to what your interests are, what you found important in the past, and that could be community involvement, it could be your legal work. And I think that most people, when they ask a question that is somewhat political, it could be a way that they just want to know more about you. They want to know more about you. So it calls upon the candidate to try to be skillful at that moment, to try to understand. First, you have to, state the law and say that, you can't answer that particular question, but, why do you ask that question? What are some of the things that concern you about the legal system? And you could, with one follow-up question or two, end up having them ask you something that you can answer. And that is much better received than simply saying, I can't answer anything about politics. Because if you sound, as I've seen some people do, like you're just trying to dodge all the difficult questions, then that'll also speak volumes about you, and maybe not instill the type of trust that you would like. Of course, I have to keep talking when I said I didn't have much to say. But with respect to community activities, when you become a candidate, that's not the time to become involved in your community. This is a public service role. We all have our different personalities and obligations, and we all may give back in different ways. And my comments aren't to judge anyone in that way. But the public doesn't want to know what you've done in the past, and becoming involved once you're a candidate just isn't going to cut it for smart voters.
So you've heard a number of you say running for judge, it's not political. The judicial election is not political, but the reality is, right, that you need endorsements, and endorsements potentially from political parties, but special interest groups even. So how did you approach the process of getting endorsements and still stay kind of above the political fray? How do you do that? Whoever can take that one first.
So I would say, Marin County is overwhelmingly Democrat. So a big get, I suppose, was the Democratic Party nomination, Marin Democrats. So that was something that obviously I sought, but there are many other organizations. I didn't notice or see really necessarily special interest groups. There were a couple union organizations. There was the Sheriff's, I think, Association was one of them, but then they had the regular unions, and the rest, I'm just trying to think here. The rest, for me at least, were endorsements from the political leaders, meaning the Board of Supervisors and cities and mayors. And for me personally, I had the good fortune of frankly, I was the attorney for the Board of Supervisors as a deputy county counsel, and in that capacity interacted with them all the time, as well as many other mayors, or they kind of knew you. And the one thing is, once you get one or two, then the others start feeling comfortable, and it kind of becomes a little bit like dominoes. And if you have people who are reputable who are endorsing you, it becomes a lot easier, I think, for other government officials or political leaders to endorse you. They get out of that little safe, that little zone, and they dip their toe into it, and they say, okay, if she's endorsing, then I'll endorse too, because I trust her judgment. And so for me, that was how the endorsement worked. The constituents of Marin County, I think, were also really interested in knowing who the judges were endorsing. And the interesting thing is, judges are not allowed to endorse except for in a judicial election. So getting other judges was a big get. And it was, frankly, it was challenging because at first there were 9 of us running. And so some of the judges on the bench were very split. And it's exhausting because you're constantly interviewing, if you will, with so many different officials to try and get their endorsements, and sending out emails and asking to meet with them and all of that. But that was probably the most important thing for me, was to get as many of those endorsements as possible. So.
Anyone else want to weigh in on this endorsement question?
Sure, I'll jump in. I also felt that most of the groups were community groups, democratic clubs centered around different neighborhoods or districts in San Francisco. San Francisco is mostly Democrat, so that was a known issue. With respect to particular interests about, let's say, different parks or the Sierra Club, or different organizations that definitely have a particular interest, and their group is formed in support of that interest. Again, I felt that they're more interested in knowing if you have someone who may be on the bench, hearing one of the issues that they may bring to court on behalf of their interest, who is conscientious and is going to work hard. And they don't, of course, they probably want to make sure that you're not going to say something that's opposed to their interest. But since we can't say anything either way, for or against, that risk shouldn't be one that we should be concerned about. doing homework, making sure that you're informed about the organization whose endorsement you're going to seek, that goes a long way. They want to know that you know who they are, that you know what they stand for, and you know, you're to some degree showing some respect for the organization by asking for the endorsement. So there is it's not that difficult, is I guess what I would say. With respect to the comments about the different elected officials that Judge Lichtcblau just brought up, I agree. Sometimes people will be more ready to endorse if other people that they know have endorsed. That can cut both ways, though. Sometimes, and I know San Francisco can be a hotbed for political activity, separating the left from the farther left. And sometimes having the endorsement of one person will negate any potential for you getting an endorsement from someone else, unless you're able to overcome that somehow. But that happens as well.
Mm-hmm. Judge-elect Evangelista, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I'd just like to add that, you know, in San Francisco, at least I thought of my base, or it's not having a base, right? Like, I thought, somebody actually mentioned this to me after the election, which is, Maria, you've done a good job of doing coalition building. And I said, oh, that's a nice way of thinking about it. The whole time I was thinking about how I was born and raised in San Francisco and how proud I am that I'm a product of San Francisco, and that I wanted to just go out and just be in every community group in San Francisco, because I am them and they am I, right? And but not necessarily talk about, like you said, we can't be political. That's actually kind of freeing. It was freeing for me, because then all we did was talk about each other. What do you do? Well, what do you do? And you know, San Francisco is a very democratic town, but you know, some groups won't endorse in judicial races if they feel like, well, if you can't get political, we'd rather not jump in on it, and that's fine. And some groups said, you know what, I can't get anything out of this race because you can't take a position and you can't curry favor. You have to follow the law. But you know what, I'm going to jump in anyways. You know why? Because it's the right thing to do. I had a lot of people tell me that, and that was kind of fun too. It was cool. And so I just thought of it as community. There's what Judge Flores said, you know, different groups of community. And if you put them all together, they form this coalition. In terms of getting some endorsements and not others, can you know, I've heard that can be an issue, but again, I was going for that coalition building. I've heard Judge Sheila say, you know, it's threading these, what is that common thread of all of these groups together, running as a judge. And Judge Flores, I think I had heard also, was the consensus candidate, right? That a candidate that everyone wanted to be behind. And that can be difficult to do, but I think because we're not allowed to get into the political weeds of things, I think that actually makes it easier, and say, well, put that aside, you know, and just go by my qualifications and, you know, whether or not you think you trust me. And I think that actually works better, you know.
Mm-hmm. The one thing I would add is running for judge, a lot of people don't really think, like, really, I didn't even know that judges were elected. A lot of people aren't necessarily informed as to the judicial system. So it became this incredible opportunity to inform people. And I started thinking about, you know, when there were 9 of us in the primary, and I mean, these were 9 people who were out there busting their butts. I mean, every single radio station, farmers market, parade, whatever you could mention was going on in Marin, there were 9 of us out there. And on the one hand, it was insane, but on the other hand, what an incredible opportunity to inform the constituents of our county about our judicial system. I mean, these people were asking so many fascinating questions, like how many judges, you know, what's the process? What do you do as a judge? Are you just in one department? You know, why is it that in my divorce, the judge, blah, blah, blah. I mean, people have so many questions, and it can be really energizing to get out there and to inform the people in your area about this judicial system. it's a fantastic opportunity for them and for you. And so you can bring that to them, not just having to talk about or feel confined about, you know, who do you stand for, but what is this judicial system and how does it serve the people in your community? I loved that.
That's a great place to stop, Judge Lichtcblau, because we have reached our time limit. But before we sign off, I'd love to give each of you the opportunity to share some advice, some of maybe the best advice that you received from someone as you launched into your run for judicial office. Who would like to start?
I'll start. I'll just say, you know, keep going. Like when you jump in with 2 feet and keep going and just keep going. Don't give up. Don't think about, oh, I think I can take a week off or I can do, you know, you got to go in just full. And there are days that you will have where you are sitting there and thinking, I can't do this anymore, but you can. There were days when I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of the farmer's market saying, I don't want to go out there anymore. I don't want to be like, hi, my name is Sheila Lichtcblau and I'm running for judge. Would you like some literature on the judicial race? It is really hard to put yourself out there, but keep doing it. Keep doing it. And we just hope to see so many more in our community out there on the bench. We need you. So please dive in.
Somebody told me to run, Maria, run. And I think that what that meant was run and don't look back. Being too preoccupied. It's important to know what your opponents are doing. But, you know, there is also a sense that you know what you're worth. You know what you need to do to win. Go do it. Don't get preoccupied with looking back because you'll trip up. So that's my advice.
My advice would be reach out. I'm sure that I speak for all of us in saying that if you were to reach us and ask to speak at some point in time off business hours about running for election for judge, we'd be happy to talk to you. So please reach out, use your resources. We want Latinx attorneys to become judges and to serve the great state of California. It is an honor like none other, and we need more of us on the bench. With respect to the day-to-day things, yes, you need to know what it is you're getting yourself into, and I agree with both of my colleagues here that once you're in it, you just try to find a way to keep going and to not sweat the small stuff. If you're ever down about something that happens during the campaign, just take a look at the population of voters in your county and reflect upon that briefly and compare that to whatever small problem you might have had. It's not that big a deal. Take inventory of all the things that you've accomplished before you made the decision to run for judge. Okay? It wasn't easy to become an attorney. It wasn't easy to get 10 years or more of practice under your belt. It wasn't easy to do whatever you did in your practice. And this isn't easy either, but it's that same passion that got you to the position where you are today that will make you a good servant for the public. And it should be easy for you to tell people about that. Be proud.
Oh, thank you all. I'm inspired. I've got like chills here. You're all amazing, incredible role models. And it's just an honor to have spent the last hour with you all. And so grateful to you all for taking this time to share what you've learned and to inspire other people who might be thinking about taking the plunge, who might be on the fence. You're wonderful, amazing, all of you. And on behalf of all of our sponsors tonight, I thank all of you who are listening out there. And this is a recorded program, so you can listen again and again, and please share with your friends. And if you know someone who's thinking about running, please share this with them and tell them they can do it. Because sometimes all you need, right, is somebody else to ask you to run.
I'd like to thank you, Anna, and Ray Manzo from San Francisco Lawyers Association as well.
Thank you.